to be, and good Lord, you don't want to do that every day because it's really sad. But one of the things that we're doing is working proactively to try and beat some of those forward-looking impacts on an area in Victoria. So this is one of our most southern properties, just down here in Victoria, the state of Victoria. And we've already seen the impacts of climate change, and specifically in a single die-off event of yellow box and grey box eucalypt trees, which are the predominant large trees in that area. And there was a particular temperature event, so during a drought, the trees had no water, which made it worse. Trees are much more resilient if they have access to water. There was a specific period where the temperature just jumped up very rapidly, 5 degrees, over a period of 5 to 6 days, and then dropped back down again. That on 3 different hillsides, same aspect, they all died off. All of those trees died off. And there were some little saplings that were coming up, but they never took. They just weren't able to build back that resilience. So in order to undertake a fairly large-scale restoration event, we found same species, seeds from the same species, but a different provenance. So we specifically went to find seeds that are growing in areas that are already seeing the climate impacts that we're going to see down in Ngāru Hills. So yes, hotter, yes, drier, but also where they're starting to see the rainfall come at a different time of year, which is a whole other biological thing that is going to impact. We've now grown up those little seedlings. Every single seedling has a QRL code. We've planted 9,000 seedlings across the entire area of Ngāru Hills, and we have volunteers and some staff members, but we have an army of volunteers that go out and measure the height of those saplings and look at the leaf health and figure out how they're doing over the first 6 months. Actually, they're all doing really well, which scientifically is not so great, but from a conservation perspective, they're doing really well. So we'll continue to scan the QRL code and keep a really close eye on those trees over the next 2 years, but really what we really want to do is figure out how the next generation are going to do. We also have a complete genetic barcode of every single one of those plants, so we'll know when the next round of saplings come, when we get recruitment in the coming years, we'll know how much genetics, how much the genetic code has come from these new saplings and the new genetic provenance in these areas. We're also we're applying this learning as well as a couple of, we also have the restoration efforts that I was talking about down in the southwest. We're starting to look at the soil biome and the interactions that that will have in terms of improving regeneration and the impacts that regeneration have on the soil biome. Again, understanding that that's a reciprocal relationship. We're applying the knowledge from that project and from the Ngāru Hills project to a huge project that's being undertaken in Uradi. And actually, I just logged onto Facebook this morning and saw one of our posts on the Uradi project showing absolute clear bare earth from a cropped area that had had the crops taken out, and it's now filled with trees and shrubs. And they're only up to here, but they're doing exceptionally well, and it's just so joyous to see the start of what we're calling Liam's Forest. And so this is how it looked probably 6 to 9 months ago. And this is Liam. This is the son of our reserve manager and ecologist who lives out on Uradi. And he'll be able to come back on his 15th birthday and see, the restored area, see the birds coming back, the same sort of experience that we've had on the Fitzgerald. And this is one of the species that, again, we're using as an indicator. If we have the Maui Foul come back of its own accord, we will know that we've been doing a really great job in terms of restoring the habitat for it to live and thrive. I've got one more example I'm going to try and tell you fairly quickly. So the last thing that we really have as one of our great tenets is measuring and adapting. We feel very strongly that you never know how well you're doing until you understand where it is that you're heading in the first place. So the example I'm going to tell you about is Wanabugumbura, which I mentioned first up. These are the people that take care of the golden bandicoot as well as a couple of other critical weight range mammals up there in the Kimberley. And they have both ocean and terrestrial, what they call sea country and land country to take care of. And it's a very large land grant. Their Indigenous protected area is over 1 million hectares, and they do an exceptional job of managing that. We've been working with them for about 10 years. And honestly, I think we learn much more from them than they learn from us, but it's a really lovely reciprocal relationship. This is one of the boats that we've actually bought to work in Hamlin, and it'll go backwards and forwards. At the moment, it's up with the Wanabugumbura to help them do sea patrols, to make sure that the country is being protected and people aren't doing anything particularly stupid, but also to make sure that they're safe. You know, it's a really harsh environment. There are lots of saltwater crocodiles and there's lots of very nasty stingers and things up in this country, so you want to make sure that people aren't just blindly going for a swim where they really, really shouldn't. One of the things that these guys have led the way is really that cool burning. So understanding how to expertly set a fire that is going to reduce your fuel load and reduce the risk of a wildfire that is completely out of control and really does devastate the biodiversity of the area without it getting out of control. You know, that's the tricky balance. Using fire to control fire is a really hard thing to do, but these guys are the experts. They've been doing it. They've maintained their role on country probably the longest of any Aboriginal people in Australia, and they've maintained that knowledge. And it's a lovely example, and I'll leave you to read that quote there, but it's a fantastic example not only of how to manage land, but how to get the most out of it in terms of biodiversity and economic gains. Not only do they protect their biodiversity through these cool burns, but they get carbon credits. So they're able to use that money to plough back into the land and into some of the social programs to keep people and country healthy into the future. So this is something that the Wunawagambra people were the first Aboriginal people to do, and we helped the Wunawagambra build the very first healthy country plan. And it's something that we've been doing on our reserves, and so when I tell you about this, keep in mind that we're also doing this across our reserves, and that's setting goals, understanding what's important to you on that country. And so this is what's important to the Wunawagambra people, everything in that left column, that is right-way fire, making sure that we're using fire the right way. A lot of the habitat and species conditions, making sure that they're on the improve, or at least maintaining that viability. Then we provide a report every year around the condition of that, our progress against those goals, and that can be, interestingly, that can now be translated into an environmental economic account. And that gives us the ability, it's a framework that's required to report back to impact investing. So not only can they start getting carbon credits, they can start getting biodiversity credits because it's backed up by a rigorous monitoring and assessment and reporting mechanism. I can talk to you a little bit more about that if anybody has any questions. So across the reserves, across the 48 reserves and partnerships that we have, how are we doing? 22% of our conservation targets, each reserve has listed the conservation targets that we care about. Of all of those targets across the 48 reserves and partnerships, 22% are improving in condition. That's amazing. 75%, we're just holding our own. And in the world of increasing threats, both threats that are within our control and threats that are totally out of our control, like climate change, 75% holding steady, I'm also pretty thrilled with. I'm thinking that's pretty good. We do have a number of conservation targets that have declined over the last little while, and that's primarily the drought. That is things that we just have zero control over. And Bulkamata, the one I mentioned that was really hit hard by the drought, has really declined in the floristic diversity, but we have confidence that it will come back. You know, that's a relatively short-term thing. We know the seed stock is still there. It will come back. I'm going to skip over these and say, I am often asked, you know, to follow up and sort of resonate with what Greta and George were saying. What can we do? What can individuals do to try and reverse this? Because I don't see that we're getting a great deal of hope from our governments and a great deal of assistance from our governments at the moment. So we have to sort of work individually and take some power back. I think the best ways to do that are divest, donate and deconsume. And there's a theme in that. It's all about the dollar. You know, the dollar has become an overarching, it hasn't just been a stand-in for a barter system, it's gone beyond that. Use every single one of your dollars as though it's a donation. Think about where your money is, think about where your bank is, think about where your 501c3, who are they investing in? Divest from fossil fuels. Can't say it more enough. Just divest from fossil fuels. Do not let them invest in anything that you wouldn't donate to. And then actually donate. Donate to the people that you believe in. Donate to any environmental organisation, I don't care who it is. And deconsume. Think about every single dollar that you buy something with. Whatever you're buying is supporting someone. Support the right people with whatever you buy. All right, I'll get off my soapbox. That's it. Thank you very much. Thank you so much. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much. Questions?
Yeah.
I have a
question about the Liam's forest restoration that you're doing. You said that you're taking into account the soil microbiome there, and I'm just wondering if you could go into that a little bit more in depth.
Yeah, unfortunately, so that's really at the studying stage. We have done a little bit of work down in the Fitzgerald, and we're using those learnings up in Urardi. We've found not only it's a little bit obvious where the soil microbiome is more diverse, we get more rapid regeneration. But the really interesting thing was that regeneration was actively changing the biome as well. So it changed not only the diversity, but it changed the construct of the bacteria that were in the soil and the protein measures that were in the soil. So we've started inoculating, certainly in the southwest, for the biome that we think is sort of relatively native to that area. And we started doing the same up in Urardi. So we have native York gum remnant veg areas, so we've been inoculating some of the re-veg areas with that soil biome as well to kickstart a couple of areas, but we're undertaking it in that experimental way as well to try and figure out whether that's really going to help with this. But actually, again, counterintuitively, all of the new restoration work, we were feeling a little bit pessimistic about undertaking a lot of restoration work in such a heavy drought year. Everything's rocketing along, so I'm not sure what we're doing, but fingers crossed it keeps going. Yeah.
You made a comment on one of the projects where I can't remember the specific species, but that you were training some species to avoid some predators. I'd like to know a little bit more about that.
Absolutely, yeah. So this is work that actually Rick Shine from the University of Sydney was doing, and he started out with quolls. This is actually, yeah, he started out with quolls, and he made sausages of cane toads, and he started out with cayenne pepper. So, and cane toads have a pretty distinctive smell. He started out with cayenne pepper and trained quolls in captivity to detect the taste of cane toads, and that would take in with the cayenne pepper, would make them sick, didn't like it, and then they would avoid the cane toads from then on. He actually found what was better was to use just a reduced version of the poison itself. So he milked the poison, put cane toad meat in a sausage case, and put a tenth of the poison, so that they became quite ill, but they didn't die. And they were able then to release those animals, and found that with the quolls there was behavioural training, there was behavioural learning within those populations. So the mothers would teach the next generation. So it has spread all the way through. It's done really well in Queensland, and we're doing the same thing in Western Australia, so we think that's going to work really well. We didn't think there would be any hope really of doing a similar sort of thing with goannas. They don't socialise. There's not a lot of behavioural learning. There's we really thought there would be a few
teaching the goannas.
Teaching the goannas, exactly.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So one of the things that we didn't have any of the goannas from the Kimberley in captivity. We didn't have enough to try and train and release, so we had to do it all in situ. And this is a fantastic example of two-way science. So we worked with the Aboriginal people up there to go and collect the goannas, and we had, white guys going and collecting goannas, and the white guys would go and collect the goannas that were bolshy. They would fall into a trap, or they would come and get you, or they'd take a bait, or they would come out and be much more obstreperous, for want of a better word, much more bold. That's
Right.
better.
So they're the bold animals.
They're the bold animals.
Not the shy ones.
Right.
Okay.
And the Aboriginal guys were going, yeah, you can get those guys, but look at this one under the bush. Mm-hmm. And so they found the really shy goannas, and we were able to train the goannas, put collars on them. And when I say we did this in collaboration with a large number of different groups. And every single one of the bold ones still ate the poisonous cane toads and died. The shy ones survived. So if we hadn't been working with the Aboriginal guys to catch the shy ones, we would have said it doesn't work in goannas.
And that idiosyncratic behavior is so interesting and so important.
Yeah.
You think they're a lizard, they all look the same, but no.
Right, and we would never have known that
That's
if we hadn't been blending that two-way science and the
That
two-way
is
knowledge
amazing.
to do that.
You're bringing that traditional knowledge in
Yeah.
there. Thank you.
Oh, you already
Yeah,
asked another question. Great presentation, by the way. I really liked it. I've been in Australia, but Shalwar Bay
Oh, cool.
specifically. When I was in the military doing training exercises. How has the public response and perception of your organization and the work that you're doing how they responded, and overall, I might not have the numbers of the entire country, but as far as responses to climate change and conservation work in general, how's that been?
So really great and complex question. So, so we were talking a little bit before, not very many people in Australia know who we are. And lots of people know who WWF is, lots of people know who, lots of the large international NGOs that can afford to get ads on telly, lots of people know about them. There are a number of national conservation organisations, and they're much lesser known. We're probably the second best known of them. We still only have name recognition amongst, I think it's 15 or 20% of the population. People who know us love us. And I think it's partly because I feel genuinely we're very much not only boots on ground, scientifically led, we're heart driven. It's people in bush heritage are just a phenomenal bunch of people. So if you come up against a bush heritage person, you're impacted. Like, you get their story, and it's quite phenomenal. But it's also that impact reporting piece. We're really structured in the way we plan, we work, and we report. And I think that's really important we get to the heart, but we also get to the head. And so I think that's part of it. The climate change piece is actually a new piece for us. We have communicated the impacts of climate change, and we've started to communicate the adaptation to climate change. And that is something that project, the Nadu Hills project, has gone, people love it. It's absolutely wildfire. It's a little bit innovative. We don't know if it's going to work yet, but people love the fact that we're trying something. We're not just giving up, and we're not thinking that nature can just take care of itself, because we're changing things so rapidly that that's just not a possibility. A new element of work that I'm working on right now is figuring out not just how do we manage the lands that we have right now, and how do we maintain them, and how do we build resilience, and how do we understand the increasing threats that are going to be coming because of climate change, but where do we buy next? Where do we target next to really, how do we look at in the world of climate change that is A, uncertain, and B, pretty awful, like it's what we know is devastating. Where do we find the areas of biodiversity that are important and thriving now? Where are they most likely to be surviving? How do we avoid buying a property that's going to be desert in 15 years' time, which is a real possibility across a lot of our landscapes. Not that desert isn't important, but we already have quite a lot of it. So the way we define right now where to work is habitat diversity, so understanding the habitats where there's not very much left, and there's not very much left protected in the National Reserve System. I'm starting to think a lot more about the probability of success long term, and the landscape features and terrain style that will actually provide that real refugia for those habitats. Species may change, but the landscape features actually provide you resilience. It changes the way water works in the landscape, and you can protect ecosystem viability and what we call adequacy, which is a terrible word, in the long term. And then I started, so I was sort of talking about the pressure of having to do this with a couple of my academic friends, and one of whom happens to be an Aboriginal woman. She said, why don't you think like an Aboriginal? Like, we've figured out where things are important and where to protect and where to go and where things live. And I didn't really quite know what to do with that, and explored a little bit more and a little bit more. And what you find, so this is an Aboriginal painting, a lot of you will have seen Aboriginal painting. That's a landscape. This is the Aboriginal people in the main have this incredible ability to think on a mapping sort of scale. They know where the water holes are, they know where the tracking is, and the way they pass this information down is through song lines. Have you heard about song lines? So they are the songs and stories that one generation passes to the next. So when they go on walkabout, it's the story that says, go to the third ridge on the left and you'll always dig down and you'll always find a water hole. You might dig a little bit further some years, but you'll always find water. Go to the third tree on the left and there's your witchetty grubs. That tree always has witchetty grubs. These are the lines of plenty. This is 60,000 years of trial and error as to where there's enough resilience in the land to give you food and water to make your way on your walkabout. Why wouldn't we use that? If we can't figure out now what it's going to look like in 60 years, let's start 60,000 years ago and bring all of that knowledge into the sort of planning that we're trying to do. So that'll be a layer that tells us not about the importance of the biodiversity, that's a whole other bit of mapping and similar to what we do now. This tells us about how likely are we to be able to protect that into the future. And so it's a lot of work to do yet, and we have to be super careful of the intellectual property of the Aboriginal people we're working with. But actually, so far, everybody's been really happy to give us this information. I'm sorry, I'm just going to expand on one little bit. So you remember all the way up there was the Okala people, right? They've got their bit of land that they were granted back. But the Owawa over here, their song lines went all the way through that territory. So if we know where those conical termite mounds are going to be in 50 to 60 years' time, we can start negotiating for access for the Okala people now, so that in the future they'll always have Owawa on their land. Okay, yeah, sorry. You're right, yep.
Okay. This reminds me of some things that are happening, of course, here. We're also a biodiversity hotspot, different kinds of islands, but many familiar concepts, obviously. There has been tension of late because of climate and mitigation banking dollars, climate offset dollars and mitigation banking dollars. Perception of conflict of interest within some of the land trusts and how they're managing the land, and maybe double dipping and hey everybody, we'll mitigate the same thing with so there's a lack of trust that's developing locally because of all the money. Right. And I'm just curious about your funding model and how it works with transparency and how you're really clear about what you're giving up and what you're getting.
Sure.
And then the other piece would be, do you have any kind of third-party oversight of your own self-monitoring?
Yeah, so that's two great questions. I'll try and take the first one first. So offsets, I think, are rife for corruption on both sides. Probably more one side than the other. Yeah, there isn't as much money floating around as you would think. And double dipping is a major issue. Australia's regulatory platforms are extraordinarily good. So even though we have increased the carbon stock that we have on our reserves from 5 million tonnes to 43 million tonnes over the time that we've owned it, we haven't been able to get a carbon credit for that, because generally we had to go in and we destocked immediately. We took stock off, and just the rebounding of all of that greenery has been the source of that carbon. What we weren't quite clever enough to do, a lot of the time, we are clever enough now to do, is go in and apply for that carbon credit. So you have to apply for the carbon credit, and then you do the work, and then you verify that going forward. We couldn't do that because we weren't doing anything additional to already having done that. We are getting carbon credits. In fact, carbon credits are paying for the Uradi. So Uradi reforestation is not costing us a cent. That's all being covered by the carbon, but it's a specific thing and we can't do anything else with it. And if we lose that, if there's a fire, if there's anything that we do to lose that reforestation, we have to pay that money back. So the regulatory framework is really quite hard. We don't touch offset money for a different reason. Like in the main, there might be a case, I'm not going to say that's as a principle, it sounded very black and white. We generally haven't, because the way offsets work in Australia, it actually encourages the destruction of pristine areas and encourages the restoration of degraded areas. Restoration is never 100%, so you've lost a pristine area, you're trying to, and there's no monitoring. So big companies are paying, theoretically, to restore an area. Does it actually get done? Are they actually paying? Very, very little checking around that. So there's lots of checking on us. There's not so much checking on the big companies. And so then this is where another area where the environmental economic accounts come in. That's actually a system that by a group of independent scientists, the Wentworth group of concerned scientists in Australia, have developed that system of the environmental economic accounts. So they provide us that third-party accreditation to make sure that it all checks out, and we open up the books to them, and they can go and visit any reserve they want. Oh, which is something I should have said. You can come and visit our reserve. So, yes,
Can I have 5 minutes to present?
please do, yes.
Okay, so my name is Ghislaine, and I have nothing to do with Australia. Actually, you hear it. I'm not even born here. I'm from Paris originally. But I want to bring you back here. So I'm the economics advisor, and the economics department is going to offer this coming summer, so summer 2020, a faculty-led program. So what is that? It's basically for students to get credits, in that case it would be 4 of them, but instead of coming here on campus, face-to-face, and commute from Palo Alto, wherever you live, to here, we're going to fly to Australia and do a bunch of things for basically 2 and 3 weeks. One of the spots will be Wulkumaja, so that's why we have invited you guys. And so basically it's just the concept is how can you get credits and go somewhere else, something fun, totally different. That's one program that we're going to have. So it's going to be an econ class. It's going to be considered as econ 136. But if you need more details, talk to me. I am in DMH 131, and I'll be happy to give you more details when we're going to take off, when we're going to arrive, what we're going to see. Of course, we're going to land in Sydney, and then go to Melbourne, go to drink wine, and so on and so on. And then eventually go to one of the reserves, and then we're done. And of course, study everything based as an economist. So why do we have subsidies for oil, but not subsidy for environmental studies? I can answer to Greta that question, why governments subsidize one industry rather than another one. But you see the world as an economist, so you can have a lot of things to see it as environmentalist. That's it.
Well, I think we are at the end of our time. Thank you so much. So I'm going to take Dr. Spindler to lunch. If anybody would like to join us, I would welcome you to do that. Thank you.
Thank you.